I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Donald Trump's co-conspirator Rudy Giuliani just stipulated to liability in a defamation lawsuit brought against him by former Georgia election workers Ruby Freeman and Shaye, who Rudy Giuliani, along with Donald Trump, spread vicious lies about. I want to show you the stipulation that Rudy Giuliani just filed in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., before federal judge Beryl Howell, where Rudy Giuliani stipulates to liability, basically meaning that he did it. And I want to show you the statement from Ruby Freeman and Shaye lawyers. I want to show you the statement from Rudy Giuliani's lawyers, which is perplexing, given the stipulation that I am about to read for you, where Rudy Giuliani stipulates to liability. This is a document filed in federal court in Washington, D.C. just before. Whereas defendant Giuliani believes that he has legal defenses to this complaint, and whereas defendant Giuliani is desirous to avoid unnecessary expenses in litigating what he believes to be unnecessary disputes, now it is hereby stipulated solely for the purposes of this litigation that defendant Giuliani, for the purposes of deciding this case on the legal issues and recognizing that all other defendants previously identified in the complaint have resolved their claims with all plaintiffs and without admitting to the truth of the allegations, hereby does not contest the following allegation. So when you just remove a lot of the extra verbiage here, what it is saying is Rudy Giuliani hereby stipulates that he does not contest the following allegations. What are those allegations? 1, defendant Giuliani concedes, solely for purposes of this litigation before this court and on appeal, that defendant Giuliani made the statements of and concerning plaintiffs, which include all of the statements detailed in plaintiff's amended complaint, and he does not dispute for purposes of this litigation that the statements carry meaning that is defamatory per se. So Giuliani is admitting to all of the defamatory statements that were alleged to have been committed in the complaint. And he's saying, yes, I made these statements, and yes, they carry meaning that is defamatory per se. In other words, he's stipulating that the statements were and constitute defamation. 2, that defendant Giuliani, for the purposes of this litigation only, publish those statements to third parties. That's another element of a defamation claim. 3, that defendant Giuliani, for the purposes of this litigation only, does not contest that, to the extent the statements were statements of fact and otherwise actionable, such actionable factual statements were false. This stipulation does not affect Giuliani's ability to seek set-off, offset, or settlement credit, or his argument that his statements are constitutionally protected statements or opinions or any applicable statute of limitations, or that Giuliani's statements in fact cause plaintiffs any damages and the amount of any alleged damages which Giuliani's statements may have caused, or any other legal defense not expressly waived by this stipulation. So what Rudy Giuliani is saying is that he does not contest, to the extent the statements were statements of fact and otherwise actionable, that such actionable factual statements were false. So he's admitting the statements were false. In the previous paragraph, he's admitting that the statements were defamatory per se. He's admitting that the statements were transmitted to third parties. Folks, those are all of the elements of a defamation claim. The only thing that he is preserving, which is curious, is he's saying, even though I made defamatory statements, he says that he will still preserve his defense that what he said was an opinion, or that he was otherwise constitutionally permitted to make those defamatory statements. But it's kind of internally inconsistent, because the Constitution does not protect defamatory statements. Yes, of course, there is a First Amendment freedom of speech, but that does not protect defamation, and you can be sued for defamation. So I'm not quite sure the point of saying that, unless it makes Rudy Giuliani feel better, or that he can go back to his base and say, well, I did say I was preserving the constitutionality defense, even though that's not really a defense he could avail himself to at this point. And then 4, that defendant Giuliani does not contest solely for the purpose of this litigation, including on any appeal in this litigation, the factual elements of liability, subject to any retained affirmative defenses not expressly waived herein, regarding plaintiff's claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress and other related tort claims. This stipulation does not affect Giuliani's ability to seek a set-off, offset, or settlement credit, or his argument that his statements are constitutionally protected statements, or opinions, or any applicable statute of limitations, or that Giuliani's conduct, in fact, caused plaintiff any damages and the amount of any alleged damages Giuliani's conduct may have caused, or any other legal defenses not expressly waived by this stipulation. So really what that paragraph is just adding is that in addition to defamation, Rudy Giuliani is stipulating to other claims that are being asserted or may be asserted by Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss as well, such as intentional infliction of emotional distress, which is a separate cause of action in addition to defamation or any other cause of action that Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss assert. And again, Giuliani says, well, he preserves affirmative defenses like that, oh, it was constitutionally protected or that it was an opinion, but that's not something that is going to be able to be validly asserted.
¿Estás disfrutando de mi podcast? Thanks to Babel, I know what that means. Do you? 1 in 5 Americans have learn a new language on their bucket list. Now, if that's you, check it off the list this summer with Babel. Because with Babel, you start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. That's right. This summer, you can start speaking a new language with Babel. Now, why Babel? Because it works. Instead of paying hundreds of dollars for a private tutor or fooling yourself with language apps that are a little more than just games, Babel's quick 10-minute lessons are designed by over 150 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babel is designed by real people for real conversations. All of Babel's tips and tools for learning a new language are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching. Babel's courses are super convenient. They've helped me learn real-life conversation skills on my schedule. Now I'm going on vacation later this year, and I definitely feel more confident in my Spanish-speaking abilities for the most everyday and important tasks, like ordering food or asking for directions, you name it. Plus, Babel's speech recognition technology, this helps you improve your pronunciation and accent, an absolute game changer. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove that Babel is better. For instance, one study shows that using Babel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. With over 10 million subscriptions sold, Babel is real language learning for real conversations. Now, here's a special limited time deal for our listeners to get you started right now. Get 55% off your Babel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/Midas. Get 55% off at babbel.com/Midas, spelled BABBEL.com/Midas. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Also, he mentions there, he preserves his right for kind of settlement set-offs, and all that means is that because this case was also brought against other people and other entities like OAN and OAN settled, ultimately, if Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss are seeking, I'm making this number up, say $10 million, and they say that's all their damages are, and OAN ultimately settled for the full $10 million, well, before a jury, that may constitute a full and complete set-off. They've been completely compensated for their damages, or one of the things a jury could balance is the relative proportion of liability between, let's say, OAN and Giuliani. And is it 70-30? Is it 80-20%? Who's paying more? Who's paying less? But in a case like this, Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss are probably claiming tens of millions of dollars based on the defamatory conduct directed their way. So any set-off of offset is going to be so de minimis in a case like this as to have no impact at all. Just so you know, like, why was Rudy Giuliani filing this stipulation? Did he just wake up one day and go, I'm going to file a stipulation admitting to liability? The backstory we've covered in detail here on the MeidasTouch Network. I'll just give you the brief summary of it. Rudy Giuliani was sanctioned by this federal judge, Judge Beryl Howell, for his discovery abuses. He was called out for intentionally spoliating or destroying evidence or recklessly spoliating the evidence so that critical emails and communications were not turned over. Rudy Giuliani has been separately sanctioned by Judge Beryl Howell, about $80,000 for his abuses in this case and not turning over documents and not conducting the searches. So Rudy Giuliani would either continue to be sanctioned. One of the things that the judge held out the prospect of was contempt against Rudy Giuliani, or essentially making the findings that Rudy Giuliani was liable and responsible anyway. And so Rudy Giuliani wanted to basically stop the bleeding from his discovery abuses, and by stipulating to the liability, he doesn't have to turn over those. The documents become irrelevant, and the case just goes to damages on a civil case. So now, before a jury, Freeman and Shaye Moss's lawyers will tell the jury, look, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he's stipulated that he engaged in this conduct, that it's false and defamatory. You don't need to even decide liability anymore. You just will be deciding the damages here. How much money does Rudy Giuliani owe them for what they did? That's what Rudy Giuliani did. He's still going to owe sanctions. It doesn't really alleviate the sanctions, but it stops more sanctions from discovery abuse. But ultimately, now a liability is admitted to. If you go to, let me pull up this statement right now by Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss's lawyers, and they accurately say what the stipulation is. Giuliani's stipulation concedes what we have always known to be true. Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss honorably performed their civic duties in the 2020 presidential election in full compliance with the law, and the allegations of election fraud that he and former President Trump made against them have been false since day one, said Michael Gottlieb, partner at Wilkie Farr and Gallagher LLP. Quote, while certain issues, including damages, remain to be decided by the court, our clients are pleased with this major milestone in their fight for justice and look forward to presenting what remains of this case at trial. Meanwhile, Rudy Giuliani's lawyers basically misrepresented what they did in that stipulation, but that shouldn't be surprising. And they said, quote, Mayor Rudy Giuliani did not acknowledge, like they still call him mayor, like you were mayor 30 years ago, dude. Mayor Rudy Giuliani did not acknowledge that the statements were false, but did not contest it in order to move on to the portion of the case that will permit a motion to dismiss. Sorry, I had to read that again. It's like, what? They're saying Mayor Rudy Giuliani did not acknowledge that the statements were false, but did not contest it in order to move on to the portion of the case that will permit a motion to dismiss. This is a legal issue, not a factual issue. Those out to smear the mayor are ignoring the fact that this stipulation is designed to get to the legal issues of the case. Ted Goodman, political advisor to Giuliani. I guess the lawyer couldn't even do it. So they had a political advisor do it. But look, that's why we read the court documents together here, so that you can see it for yourself, and then we could just live in a fact-based evidence world. This is what Giuliani said. You know, and one working theory that I have as well, and I've seen some other commentators, say this as well, is that Rudy Giuliani's cooperating with special counsel Jack Smith and probably has already admitted to lying about Freeman and Shaye Moss as part of his proffer agreement to Jack Smith anyway. And so if he's already admitted to Jack Smith that he engaged in defamation, that proffer agreement would be void if Rudy Giuliani was lying. And so I think Rudy Giuliani also had to kind of make this stipulation as well in the civil case. Otherwise it would undermine his proffer agreement if he was contesting liability. And then I think that would potentially result in additional charges being brought against him, or a longer sentencing in the event he's convicted. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 1.5 million subscribers thanks to your support. Check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Wherever you get audio podcasts, subscribe to the MeidasTouch podcast. Have a great day. Hit subscribe.
Hey, Midas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.